Story. After 5 years, millionaire husband found true love and wanted a divorce. Pregnant wife laughed and called my assistant. Before this story begins, picture 400 people watching a successful man announce that his pregnant wife is no longer part of his future, without realizing she is the reason his company still has won. Stay until the end, because the public humiliation is only the first surprise, and the final consequence will not come from revenge. It will come from evidence. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments whether trust can survive after someone chooses pride over the truth. Now listen closely, because some smiles are not born from happiness. They appear when a person realizes the one standing across from her has just destroyed himself. The crystal chandelier scattered golden light across the grand ballroom of the Halcyon Hotel in Manhattan, where nearly 400 executives, investors, and journalists gathered to celebrate the 5th anniversary of Prescott Meridian. The orchestra played while cameras captured another apparent billionaire success story, until Nathaniel Prescott stood. He adjusted the cuff of his tailored tuxedo, accepted the microphone with practiced confidence, and smiled toward the audience. Tonight, he announced, is the beginning of a new chapter. Polite applause filled the room. Then he turned toward his wife. Evelyn Hartwell Prescott, 7 months pregnant, rested one gentle hand against her baby bump as she slowly rose from her chair. Her ivory maternity gown flowed gracefully beneath the lights, her honey blonde hair falling over one shoulder, her blue-gray eyes calm enough to make the room feel strangely quiet before anyone understood why. Nathaniel placed a leather folder on the table between them. The sharp sound echoed louder than the orchestra. "I'm filing for divorce." Silence. The musicians stopped playing almost instinctively. Someone in the front row lowered a champagne glass without taking a sip. Nathaniel continued before anyone could react. "I've met someone who understands me. Someone who loves the real me instead of my position." Another figure stepped onto the stage. Sloane Mercer. Her elegant black evening gown sparkled beneath the lights. Around her neck rested a familiar string of white pearls. Evelyn recognized it immediately. It had belonged to her grandmother. Nathaniel didn't notice the slight movement in Evelyn's eyes. "I hope," he said confidently, "everyone here will respect our decision." The audience exchanged uneasy glances. Nobody applauded this time. A business reporter quietly lowered her camera. An elderly board member frowned so deeply that even the investors beside him shifted uncomfortably. The audience expected tears or anger from the pregnant wife being humiliated in public. Instead, Evelyn smiled. It was peaceful, almost amused. Nathaniel blinked. "You're smiling?" She looked directly into his eyes. "For 5 years," she said quietly, "I wondered what kind of ending this story deserved." Her voice remained gentle. "So did I." Then she reached into her handbag. Not for tissues, not for the divorce papers. She removed only her phone. The ballroom remained completely still as she pressed one familiar contact. The call connected after a single ring. "Caleb." Her tone never changed. "Authorize the Hartwell Covenant review." Across the city, inside an office where every light still burned despite the late hour, Caleb Rhodes slowly removed his glasses. He had waited years to hear those 4 words. "Yes, Miss Hartwell." She watched Nathaniel without looking away. "Tonight." A pause. Then Caleb asked whether the review should be limited to the merger. "Limited to the transactions covered by our agreements," she answered. "The truth will be enough." The call ended. Within minutes, the company's general counsel received a formal notice that the merger required Hartwell Trust consent and that disputed records must be preserved. The anniversary presentation was paused, and the enormous screen behind Nathaniel returned to the company logo while directors began checking their phones. Nathaniel frowned. "What happened?" Nobody answered. Near the entrance, 2 outside attorneys approached the independent board chair. Behind them walked Arthur Whitmore, a silver-haired trustee carrying the financing documents that Nathaniel had signed years earlier. Evelyn remained seated, one hand gently resting over the child she carried. Outside, Manhattan glittered while the first cracks spread through Nathaniel's certainty. Nathaniel still believed he had just ended a marriage. He had no idea he had just declared war on the woman who had built the foundation beneath every success he proudly called his own. And before sunrise, the empire bearing his name would begin asking a single terrifying question. Who had financed it, protected it, and held the rights Nathaniel had chosen never to understand. The most powerful people in a room are rarely the ones standing at the microphone. They are the ones nobody notices until everything begins to fall apart. 5 years earlier, rain washed over the streets of Manhattan with relentless determination, blurring the skyline into silver shadows. Inside a modest conference room 23 floors above the city, Nathaniel Prescott stared at a financial report that looked less like a business forecast and more like a death certificate. Prescott Meridian had 37 days before running out of cash. The company's largest lender had withdrawn support. 2 major investors had quietly sold their positions. Payroll was approaching. Construction projects were freezing one after another. Nathaniel loosened his tie and rubbed exhausted eyes that had not truly rested in weeks. "This is over," one board member whispered. Another simply closed his notebook. No one argued. No one offered another solution. Then the conference room door opened. A young woman stepped inside carrying nothing more than a leather portfolio and a paper coffee cup. Her honey blonde hair was tied loosely behind her shoulders. She wore a simple cream-colored coat instead of expensive designer labels. There was nothing about Evelyn Hartwell that suggested extraordinary influence, which was precisely how she preferred it. Nathaniel forced a tired smile. "You actually came. You sounded like someone who needed coffee," she replied gently, placing the cup beside him. He laughed for the first time in days. "I need much more than coffee." She quietly opened the financial statements spread across the conference table. No dramatic speeches. No immediate advice. Only silence. For nearly 20 minutes, she studied every page while rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally, she asked one question. "Does anyone here still believe the company deserves to survive?" The room became strangely uncomfortable. Executives looked toward one another instead of answering. Nathaniel was the only person who finally spoke. "I do." She nodded once. "Then stop trying to save today's company." He frowned. "What? Build the company investors will want 2 years from now." Her finger moved across the reports. "You're selling buildings." Another page turned. "You should be selling long-term infrastructure partnerships." Another. "You're chasing revenue." Another. "You should be protecting recurring contracts." One observation followed another with astonishing precision. Within 30 minutes, she had quietly dismantled 3 years of strategic mistakes without raising her voice even once. The directors who had ignored Nathaniel all morning suddenly stopped interrupting. Pens began moving. Questions replaced excuses. Hope returned so gradually that nobody noticed the exact moment it happened. Nathaniel watched her in disbelief. "Where did you learn all this?" She smiled. "My father believed balance sheets tell the truth long before people do." He never asked another question. That evening, after every executive had left, Nathaniel remained alone beside the conference room windows. "Evelyn." She turned. "If this somehow works." He hesitated. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret believing in me." For just a second, something almost fragile crossed her face. "I already believe in who you could become." Outside, lightning flashed across the skyline. Neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street. Inside sat Caleb Rhodes. He watched the conference room through tinted glass while speaking quietly into his phone. "She has made her decision." A calm voice answered from the other end. "Prepare the Hartwell legacy documents." Caleb closed the call. The following morning, lawyers representing an anonymous family investment trust contacted Prescott Meridian with an unexpected proposal. A $48 million rescue package. Patient capital. No publicity. No press conference. No request for a board seat. Only one unusual condition. The identity of the principal investor would remain permanently confidential. Nathaniel accepted before lunch. He believed fortune had finally smiled upon him. He never imagined that the woman sharing takeout dinners beside him, celebrating every small victory, and encouraging him through every impossible negotiation was the very person whose signature had quietly kept his dream alive. Years later, the world would call Nathaniel Prescott a self-made millionaire. Only 4 people knew the truth. One of them had just laughed after receiving divorce papers. Another had already opened the Hartwell file. And inside a sealed vault beneath the Hartwell Legacy Trust rested a single original investment agreement bearing a signature that would soon change everything. E. Hartwell. An affair rarely begins with love. It begins with someone carefully rewriting another person's reality. By the time Prescott Meridian became one of Manhattan's fastest-growing infrastructure companies, Nathaniel Prescott had forgotten what failure felt like. Success had changed the way people looked at him. Magazine covers called him visionary. Business podcasts described him as self-made. Young entrepreneurs quoted his speeches. Every room seemed to become quieter the moment he entered. Nathaniel believed he had earned every second of it. Someone made sure he believed exactly that. Her name was Sloan Mercer. She arrived at Prescott Meridian 14 months before the anniversary gala as Chief Strategy and Communications Officer, carrying an impressive resume from one of New York's leading advisory firms. The role gave her legitimate access to Nathaniel's executive calendar, merger communications, and public relations budgets. Access she gradually abused. Elegant, articulate, and endlessly attentive, she transformed the company's public image almost overnight. Investors loved her. Journalists trusted her. Employees admired her confidence. Nathaniel appreciated something else. She always seemed to understand him. Unlike Evelyn. Or so he had gradually been taught to believe. It never happened all at once. The manipulation was almost invisible. A canceled dinner reservation because Mrs. Prescott said she wasn't feeling well. An unanswered phone call because she's probably resting. A forgotten anniversary lunch because your calendar never showed it. A prenatal appointment mysteriously disappearing from his schedule. Flowers that Evelyn never received. Messages that Nathaniel never read. Tiny moments. Almost impossible to notice individually. Devastating when carefully connected together. Each misunderstanding became another brick in a wall neither husband nor wife realized someone else was building between them. Sloan never openly criticized Evelyn. She simply asked carefully chosen questions. Do you think she's been distant lately? I hope she's not overwhelmed by your success. You work so hard. Sometimes people grow apart. She never planted conclusions. She planted doubts. Nathaniel unknowingly watered them himself. Meanwhile, Evelyn noticed the changes long before she understood their source. Nathaniel stopped calling during business trips. He arrived home distracted. Conversations became shorter. His laughter belonged more to boardrooms than to dinner tables. One evening she quietly asked whether everything was all right. He smiled politely. I'm just tired. She believed him. Because trust had always been easier than suspicion. Across town, inside a luxury apartment Nathaniel had quietly purchased for corporate hospitality, Sloan studied Nathaniel's executive calendar. A forwarded appointment invitation identified a prenatal visit, information she had no legitimate business reason to use. Sloan's expression never changed. Instead, she picked up her phone. She used her administrator privileges to remove the appointment from Nathaniel's calendar and inserted a false investor meeting. The audit log would later preserve both actions. When Evelyn waited alone inside the examination room, she kept glancing toward the empty chair beside her. She smiled politely when the doctor apologized. Perhaps your husband was delayed. She answered softly. He always keeps his promises. Outside the clinic, Nathaniel sat in a conference room wondering why Evelyn had forgotten to tell him about today's appointment. Someone had already deleted every reminder. The distance between them grew without either realizing another pair of hands was quietly pulling the strings. Weeks later, Sloan invited Nathaniel for coffee after an exhausting shareholder presentation. She appeared hesitant. I probably shouldn't say this. Nathaniel looked up. What is it? I heard Evelyn discussing financial advisors. He frowned. What about them? Sloan lowered her voice. It sounded like she was preparing independent accounts. She paused. I hope I'm wrong. She was. The meetings involved estate planning for their unborn child. Nathaniel never asked Evelyn. He simply assumed. Trust had already changed direction. One evening, while Nathaniel worked late with Sloan preparing the company's largest merger in history, Caleb Rhodes quietly placed a sealed envelope on Evelyn's desk inside Hartwell Legacy Trust. His expression remained unreadable. Outside counsel recovered something during the merger review. Inside the envelope rested copies of deleted corporate emails preserved on backup servers after counsel issued a litigation hold. One subject line immediately caught Evelyn's attention. Once the divorce is signed, the Hartwell protection disappears. She read it twice. Then a third time. The sender's name made her heart fall silent. Sloan Mercer. But the final sentence froze the room around her. He still has no idea who she really is. Caleb slowly closed the folder. They're preparing for something much bigger than an affair. Evelyn looked out across the Manhattan skyline, resting one hand over the life growing quietly beneath her heart. For the first time in 5 years, she realized someone had not merely stolen her husband's affection. They had been planning to steal the future her child had not yet been born to inherit. The cruelest betrayals are not the ones that throw you out of a house. They are the ones that convince you the house was never yours to begin with. The penthouse overlooking Central Park had once been Nathaniel Prescott's favorite place in the world. 5 years earlier, it had been filled with unopened pizza boxes, handwritten business plans, and two people dreaming about a future that seemed impossible. Now it echoed with silence. The anniversary gala had ended less than an hour ago. Nathaniel loosened his tie as he walked through the front door, convinced he had finally done what needed to be done. Sloane remained downstairs, speaking with reporters. For the first time, Nathaniel believed his life was becoming honest. Evelyn entered several minutes later. She carried no luggage. No tears stained her face. Only the same calm expression that had unsettled him all evening. Nathaniel placed the divorce agreement on the marble kitchen island. "I've already signed." His voice sounded almost rehearsed. "You should have your attorney review it tomorrow." Evelyn glanced briefly at the documents, but made no effort to touch them. Instead, she slowly removed her wedding ring. She placed it beside the folder. The soft metallic sound seemed louder than Nathaniel's speech. "I've arranged temporary financial support," he continued. "The penthouse will remain mine." He paused. "The company attorneys have already separated our accounts." Another pause. "I think it would be better if you found somewhere else to stay before the weekend." For several seconds, Evelyn simply looked around the apartment. Her eyes paused on the framed photograph hanging above the fireplace. Two younger versions of themselves stood in front of Prescott Meridian's very first construction site. Nathaniel had one arm around her shoulders. Written beneath the picture, in his own handwriting, were the words, "Nothing without you." She smiled almost imperceptibly. "You've redecorated more than the apartment." Nathaniel frowned. "What does that mean?" "You've rewritten your memories." He looked away. "I've rewritten my future." Silence settled between them once again. Then Evelyn quietly walked toward the nursery. The room was almost finished. White walls, a wooden crib, a rocking chair facing enormous windows overlooking Manhattan. She rested one hand against the crib rail. Very gently, almost like introducing a child to a world she was no longer certain deserved innocence. Nathaniel remained standing in the doorway. "I'll make sure the baby has everything." She nodded. "I'm sure you believe that." "I do." She turned toward him. "No, Nate." Her voice remained remarkably soft. "You believe money can replace presence." The words landed without anger, which somehow hurt more. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to do the responsible thing." "Are you?" She walked back into the living room carrying only 3 objects. The ultrasound photograph, the faded employee identification badge he had given her during the company's first year, and a small walnut box engraved with a discreet silver crest. Nathaniel barely noticed it. He was too focused on the badge. "You still kept that?" She looked at the worn plastic card. "You once told me it reminded you where everything began." She carefully placed it inside her handbag. "The difference is..." She lifted her eyes to meet his. "I never forgot." Nathaniel sighed impatiently. "You're making this harder than it has to be." "No." She gently closed the walnut box. "I'm making it truthful." He laughed quietly. "Evelyn, you never worked for Prescott Meridian after those first months." "You're right." She nodded. "I never worked for Prescott Meridian." A strange calm settled over the room. "But Prescott Meridian has been working for me for years." Nathaniel stared at her, uncertain whether she was joking. Before he could answer, the elevator chimed. Its polished doors slid open. Caleb Rhodes stepped into the penthouse accompanied by 2 attorneys wearing dark navy suits. Neither looked surprised to see Evelyn. Instead, both greeted her with quiet respect. "Good evening, Miss Hartwell." Nathaniel's expression hardened. "What is this?" No one answered him immediately. One attorney handed Caleb a sealed envelope. He opened it carefully before placing several legal documents across the marble island beside the divorce papers. Their embossed seals caught the light. Emergency notice. Merger suspension. Trust authority review. Nathaniel looked from one document to another. "What merger?" Caleb finally raised his eyes. "The one that cannot proceed under the preferred share terms and senior financing covenants without written consent from the Hartwell Legacy Trust. Nathaniel laughed in disbelief. My company doesn't answer to any trust. Caleb's expression never changed. It doesn't. He paused. It must honor the agreements attached to the capital that saved it. Outside, thunder rolled across Manhattan. Inside the penthouse, Nathaniel still believed he was arguing over a marriage. He had not yet realized the conversation had already become something infinitely more dangerous. Ownership. Truth is patient. It lets lies grow tall enough for everyone to see them fall. No one left the boardroom. The city outside continued moving as though nothing had happened. But inside Prescott Meridian headquarters, time seemed to slow beneath the weight of evidence. Arthur Whitmore closed the investment binder. We will now hear the findings of the independent forensic review. The lights dimmed. Caleb Rhodes connected a secure drive to the presentation system. A new title appeared across the enormous screen. Preliminary Forensic Audit. The first slide contained nothing dramatic. Just numbers, vendor invoices, payment dates, authorization codes, expense reports. Nathaniel frowned. What exactly am I looking at? Caleb answered without emotion. Patterns. Another slide appeared. 3 consulting firms. Different names. Different mailing addresses. The same bank account. Another click. Luxury travel expenses classified as investor relations. Private residences billed as executive retreats. Designer purchases categorized as client entertainment. Every transaction had one common approval. Sloan Mercer. The room grew quieter with every page. One director leaned forward. Our accounting department missed this. The accounting department never saw it, Caleb replied. The payments were routed through special executive authorization. Nathaniel slowly turned toward Sloan. You approve these? She remained composed. Every expenditure supported company growth. Arthur calmly interrupted. That statement will be evaluated after the audit is complete. Another slide illuminated the room. Corporate communications. Deleted emails. Recovered backups. Calendar modifications. Meeting cancellations. Nathaniel recognized the dates immediately. His wedding anniversary. Evelyn's prenatal appointments. Several board dinners he believed Evelyn had declined. Caleb opened the first recovered message. From Sloan Mercer. Action completed. Calendar updated. The second. Mrs. Prescott never received the invitation. The third. Mr. Prescott believes she canceled. One email after another. Each one insignificant by itself. Together, they formed a blueprint. Not of financial fraud. Of emotional manipulation. Nathaniel's breathing became noticeably heavier. He remembered every argument. Every misunderstanding. Every lonely dinner. Every moment he believed Evelyn had become distant. The memories no longer looked the same. He looked toward Sloan. You said. His voice weakened. You told me she stopped caring. Sloan finally spoke. I protected you. No. The word came quietly. It was Evelyn. You protected your plan. For the first time, Sloan's confidence faltered. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Evelyn stood slowly, one hand resting against her pregnancy. You never wanted my marriage. Her eyes remained steady. You wanted the company that stood behind it. No one interrupted. Arthur nodded toward Caleb. Continue. The final section of the audit appeared. Confidential merger projections. If the merger closed, executive compensation packages would trigger immediately. A negotiated conversion would reduce the Hartwell preferred shares voting power, and related amendments would remove consent rights over future asset sales. Authority would quietly shift if the disclosures were accepted as accurate. Nathaniel looked from the projections to Evelyn, then back again. His face slowly lost all color. The merger, he whispered, was timed. Caleb answered, yes. Nathaniel swallowed. The divorce. Caleb met his eyes. Was also timed. Silence. The realization spread through the room before anyone spoke it aloud. Separate Nathaniel from Evelyn. Complete the divorce. Remove Hartwell family protections. Finalize the merger. Redirect executive control. The affair had never been the destination. It had been the distraction. One director removed his glasses. My God. Another quietly pushed his chair backward. This was planned. Arthur folded his hands. For over a year. Nathaniel stared at Sloan as though seeing a stranger. You loved me. She hesitated. Just long enough. I believed in our future. The hesitation answered the question she refused to. Nathaniel slowly lowered his head. Everything he had sacrificed. Everything he had accused Evelyn of becoming. Everything he believed he had chosen freely. Someone else had arranged each step long before he took it. Across the table, Evelyn watched him without satisfaction. There was no triumph in her eyes, only exhaustion. Because discovering that your husband had been deceived was painful. Discovering that he had chosen not to trust you was something else entirely. Arthur finally broke the silence. The forensic review is only beginning. He closed the file. Financial losses can usually be recovered. His gaze moved from the frozen directors to Nathaniel. But there is another question no auditor can answer. He paused. When the evidence proves that a company was manipulated, his eyes settled on Evelyn. Who will repair the family that was manipulated with it? A lie survives only while evidence remains fragmented. Once the pieces are placed together, memory has somewhere to stand. The boardroom remained quiet as Caleb connected a second encrypted drive to an isolated review computer. This material comes from lawful corporate records and voluntarily produced documents, he said. The lobby cameras record video only. Any audio you hear comes from meetings where the platform announced that recording had begun. That explanation mattered. Evelyn wanted evidence that could survive scrutiny, not a dramatic secret recording that would collapse in court. The first video showed her arriving at reception with lunch for Nathaniel. Sloan met her near the desk. There was no audio, but the images showed Evelyn handing over the bag and leaving. A second camera later showed Sloan removing the handwritten note and placing the lunch in a refrigerator. The next item was a delivery log. Flowers Nathaniel sent to Evelyn arrived at headquarters because he believed she would attend a board dinner. Sloan signed for them and instructed an assistant by email to move them to storage. Another audit log showed her deleting a prenatal appointment from Nathaniel's calendar and adding a false investor meeting. Nathaniel watched the dates appear. You told me she stopped trying. Sloan folded her arms. I managed an executive schedule. People cancel things every day. Caleb displayed the administrator history. The appointment was not canceled by Mrs. Prescott. It was removed by your account. Then came a recorded merger conference. The automated notice sounded at the beginning, and Sloan remained on the call with two consultants. She discussed waiting until after the divorce filing, reducing the Hartwell Trust's consent rights through the proposed conversion, and using Nathaniel's approval to move consulting contracts before the board received full disclosures. Sloan stood. Those were hypothetical transaction structures. The full recording will be reviewed, Arthur said. No one is relying on an edited clip. Nathaniel turned toward Evelyn. You knew this was happening? I suspected interference, she answered. I did not know how much you were willing to believe without asking me. The words left no place for him to hide. Sloan had manipulated calendars and messages. Nathaniel had still chosen public humiliation. She had not forced him to give away Evelyn's pearls, dismiss her concerns, or announce a divorce before hundreds of people. The audit committee moved into executive session with outside counsel. When the directors returned, the independent chair read the resolutions. Sloan would be terminated for cause based on misuse of company systems, undisclosed conflicts, and violations of the records policy. Granting final civil damages or criminal punishment was beyond the board's authority. Counsel would preserve evidence, notify insurers and regulators as required, and cooperate with any lawful investigation. Sloan gathered her handbag. Before leaving, she looked at Evelyn. You think removing me repairs what he did? No, Evelyn said. It only stops you from doing more. After the doors closed, the board addressed Nathaniel. He would be placed on administrative leave while the investigation continued. The chief operating officer would serve as interim chief executive. The merger would remain paused under the financing covenants and preferred share terms. Nathaniel looked toward the woman he had abandoned. I was deceived. Yes, Evelyn said. He waited. And you betrayed me, she continued. Both are true. For the first time, he understood that exposing Sloan would not return him to innocence. The most valuable thing he had lost had never appeared on a balance sheet, and no board vote could restore it. Justice becomes credible when every claim enters the courtroom that actually has authority to decide it. 6 weeks later, rain covered the steps of the New York County Supreme Court. Evelyn was 8.5 months pregnant. Reporters gathered outside because the commercial division was hearing Prescott Meridian's request for a preliminary injunction against related party entities and former executives. This was not the divorce trial. New York Supreme Court had jurisdiction over the matrimonial action as well, but the business dispute had a separate index number, separate pleadings, and separate counsel. Nor was it a criminal prosecution. State and federal investigators were reviewing referrals, but no one in the civil courtroom would be convicted that morning. The judge began by stating the limited issue, whether identified assets and records should be preserved while the company pursued fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and interference claims. Arthur explained the Hartwell Trust's investment. It did not own every share of Prescott Meridian. It held preferred voting stock, senior secured debt, and written consent rights over a merger, a change in control, or a major asset sale. Those protections appeared in agreements Nathaniel had signed and the board had approved 5 years earlier. Forensic accountants traced reimbursements, consulting contracts, and transfers. Server logs documented calendar changes and deleted messages. The complete merger conference recording included the automated notice. Sloan's lawyers challenged interpretation, chain of custody, and relevance. Some objections were sustained and others denied. Evidence did not become unquestionable merely because a projector displayed it. Nathaniel's signatures appeared on several approvals. His counsel argued that Sloan had supplied false information. The judge replied, "That may support claims against her. It does not resolve the duties of the officer who approved the transactions." When Nathaniel testified, he did not ask to address Evelyn directly. His lawyer had warned him that a courtroom was not a stage for personal redemption. "I relied on Ms. Mercer," he said. "I also failed to read documents, ignored internal concerns, and allowed my personal relationship to influence corporate judgment." The admission did not make him heroic. It made the record clearer. The judge granted a tailored injunction. The disputed entities could not transfer specified assets outside the ordinary course of business. Records had to be preserved. An independent monitor would review extraordinary payments while discovery proceeded. The order did not transfer Prescott Meridian to Evelyn, resolve the divorce, or determine criminal guilt. Outside, reporters asked Evelyn whether she had taken back her husband's empire. "It was never mine to take," she said. "Nathaniel founded the company. My family trust financed and protected it. The court protected evidence today. Those are different truths." Her matrimonial case proceeded separately with compulsory financial disclosure. Under New York law, property acquired before marriage or received through inheritance could remain separate, while marital property and any appreciation tied to a spouse's contributions required careful analysis. Evelyn did not assume the Hartwell name placed every asset beyond review. Nathaniel could not assume marriage entitled him to trust property he had not helped create. Near the courthouse exit, he spoke quietly. "I finally understand who you are." Evelyn stopped. "No, you understand what I own and what I protected. Knowing me would have required listening before a judge ordered you to produce documents." She walked into the rain with Caleb beside her. 2 weeks remained before her due date. The legal cases would continue for months, perhaps years. But the most important decision had already been made without a gavel. She would not return to a marriage in which truth became visible only after evidence forced it into the room. Some endings do not sound like applause. They sound like the breathing of a child who will never be asked to inherit her mother's silence. 2 weeks later, Evelyn gave birth to a healthy daughter at Hartwell Memorial Medical Center. She named her Grace, not because life had been gracious, but because she had chosen restraint when public revenge would have been easier. Caleb brought the faded employee badge Evelyn had kept from Prescott Meridian's first difficult year. He had placed it in a simple frame. Beneath it, a silver plaque read, "She did not need the credit. She deserved the truth." Evelyn smiled. "Put it in the nursery. One day I will tell her why it matters." No reporters entered the maternity floor. The trust communications team issued one sentence confirming that mother and child were healthy and requesting privacy. Nathaniel did not arrive uninvited. Through lawyers, he asked to send a letter and requested that future parenting discussions occur with professional guidance. Evelyn accepted the letter but did not read it until Grace was asleep. He wrote that he would not ask for reconciliation or immediate forgiveness. He acknowledged the affair, the public humiliation, and his failure to separate corporate judgment from personal desire. He asked only for the opportunity, over time and under appropriate boundaries, to become a father Grace could safely know. Evelyn folded the letter. An apology did not earn access. But honest accountability was more useful than another performance. The corporate and legal consequences unfolded slowly. Prescott Meridian recovered funds and terminated tainted contracts. The independent board completed a governance review, strengthened conflict disclosures, and limited executive control over vendor approvals. Nathaniel resigned as chief executive. Months later, civil claims were settled in part, while prosecutors made independent decisions based on subpoenas, warrants, financial records, and cooperating witnesses. Sloan faced civil liability and later resolved criminal allegations related to false records and misappropriated company funds. The outcome did not depend on the affair itself. Infidelity was not the charge. Her misuse of access and financial conduct were what mattered. The divorce concluded after disclosure and negotiation. Evelyn retained her inherited trust interests and separate property, subject to the court's review of any marital claims. Nathaniel retained assets allocated under the settlement and accepted responsibility for reimbursements linked to corporate misconduct. Parenting time began only after evaluations and a structured plan centered on Grace's welfare. Prescott Meridian survived under new management. Evelyn accepted a temporary board role designated by the Hartwell preferred shares, then stepped back when independent directors could govern without her. She did not merge the company into her family trust or rewrite its history. Nathaniel had founded it. She had saved it. Employees had built it. The future belonged to all of them, not to a marriage that had ended. One winter afternoon, Evelyn stood near the hospital window with Grace resting against her shoulder. Snow crossed Manhattan in slow white lines. "You will grow up knowing your worth before anyone else tells you what it is," she whispered. "But I will also teach you that strength is not the same as control, and evidence is not the same as revenge." Years later, people remembered the gala, the pearls, the paused merger, and the courtroom steps. The details changed as stories always do. What remained was simpler. A pregnant woman refused to collapse for an audience. A mother protected her child without pretending the law was magic. And a powerful man learned too late that being deceived did not excuse the betrayal he willingly performed. Some men lose status and call it tragedy. Nathaniel's real loss was quieter. He had stood beside a woman of courage for 5 years and never learned to recognize her until she walked away.